in a different area, and we need to come together and actually talk to each other. And yeah, so we're there to support and to help.
I think one of the reasons why Scotland has managed to be successful in this area is that because of the referendum to separate from the UK, the whole of Scotland kind of repoliticised itself from what little I've heard about it. And I think therein lies one of the major problems that we are facing, is that we're no longer really recognise in England that life is a political act. And I'm lucky to come from Sheffield, where we have a group of people who decided that we needed to learn about our power, and they set up something called the Festival of Debate. Now, instead of it just running once a year, it runs twice a year, and they invite people. It's all for free. It's just amazing how individuals coming together can you start to realise actually how powerful you are, and then you start to wake up to what's our responsibility, because most of us, it's about us not recognising that we are powerful and we have to take that responsibility.
Right. Anybody else got any questions? Do you want to use the mic? You'd have to come over if you want.
Shouldn't really need it.
Good.
My question is on the new Commons Charter. How are you going to go about doing this? How do we get involved? And how do we get it more publicised to actually bring this into being?
It's a very good question. Yeah.
Well, Guy's standing is a different. I think it's a different thing. Ours is a community charter, and yours was a charter of the Commons. But the community charter starts with just wanting to host one, like here, and Isabel, who's with the Transition Town movement, and Jamie, who is in Scotland, who's had that. We'd come down and we'd introduce what the charter is. We'd have here tables with questions that the people would come together as to what are the key questions around your heritage, your sense of identity in this place. And then from that conversation would draw out elements that we could then put into the charter. And that document, we found, builds people's confidence and ideas together. So it builds all the kind of sense of, like, even the things that we're talking about the sites of the Viking heritage and so on. So it's trying to really remember the roots. And so from that remembrance, you begin to know what you love in order to be able to protect it. And that's the first step. So it's taking one step at a time.
Guy, did you want to say something on this?
Yeah, I don't want to take their time.
No,
but,
okay.
It's a very good question. Imagine you're an incoming government in 2019, 2020 perhaps. What would be a set of policies to protect the commons, enhance the commons, and what would you be wanting the new Prime Minister to do? And we're going to be talking about it, and Julie's mentioned it, and I've mentioned it, next weekend at Lincoln. And John McDonnell's asked me to come in with some ideas. Imagine that you would want to start with the low-hanging fruit, which is get our land registry to have a complete record of all land ownership in this country. Here we have a land registry which is responsible, and it's been doing its work since 1925, and they still don't have a record of land ownership in this country. It's only about 80% complete. Well, as Guy Shrubsole and others have been showing, most of the 20% is almost certainly the land of extremely wealthy people. Okay? And they're getting away with not having it registered. Simple thing like that. Then you've got to have the protection of the Forestry Commission. The Tories wanted to privatize it. They actually nearly did, and it was only a public protest that saved it. But then you've got harder things like, what do we do about reclaiming water? What policy? Thames Water has just been convicted of pouring 1.4 billion tons of untreated sewage into the Thames. They've distributed 1.6 billion pounds in dividends to their foreign shareholders, and they got a slap on the wrist with a fine of 20 million. Okay? Disproportionate. Completely disproportionate. Ridiculous. And they're still pouring about millions of tons of untreated sewage, but they claim they can't fill the leaks. Ha! Okay? So there are that sort of thing. But then we've got to do things like rescuing POPs. Now, more and more of our cities, we can't go on, we can't do what we would like to do. It's because it's privately owned. They can fine people for parking because it's not a public commons, it's privately owned. I mean, so we need to do that sort of thing. Yeah. These are practical things. I wanted to ask Joe a question. I was going to keep quiet, but now I've got the floor. I will ask Joe a question. I've got a proposal that an incoming government should set up a Commons Defence Preservation Fund. And that fund, which would be independent board to govern the fund, should determine whether they should give legal aid to groups that are bringing feasible cases to the courts. Okay? They would have to decide how to allocate, because resources are always going to be limited, and you don't want to be giving it out to every Tom, Dick and Harry who comes along and might have a frivolous case, right? But you want it to be independent so that we can have the Commons have good defence without you having to suffer and scrape to get to your few thousand that you can keep a case going. Have a publicly funded project where you put in a certain amount of money each year that's available for such causes. That sort of thing is what we should all be imagining, right? And you can think of a lot of things like that, and if you've got a sympathetic government, we can make progress. Thank you very much. How do you respond?
Yeah, I do want to respond to it, because I think we're already beyond that, to be honest with you. I think we're already at a stage in in global governance, we're already well beyond that, where multinational corporations now, through supranational organisations, international institutions, I think that we're already beyond the point where the political power, which has been there for a long, long time, is within them organisations. I think the difference between the UK, between Scotland and England was right there. It was right. It was the referendum. I mean, we sent up all our resources. Cameron, Blair, the Browns, they were all up into Scotland in the coming weeks before the referendum. If they hadn't been, they'd have lost it. And the people realised what had happened after the referendum, and they thought, never again. And so then Scottish political movements in Scotland come together. That's how they kicked Ineos out of Scotland. I think we have a different issue in the UK. I think, especially from Westminster, I think there's so much corruption there. I find to be able to try and get something like that into the House of Commons would be pretty hard to do. And I feel the only way to take back that sort of stuff is we have to start putting major pressure on multinational corporations, and we need to start taking some defeats against them and showing that actually the people have got the power and they haven't. And until we get to that stage, the other stuff.
We need some wins.
The other stuff is not a good discussion before we get to that. I don't think.
Can I just come back both to that, because I agree with you, because I think we have to go more fundamental than what you've said about environmental problems, because environmental law comes still from the same mindset that says property is sacrosanct, and environmental law is all just about mitigating the damage that ownership of that right has. What happened with property, and this is kind of the idea that I'm thinking of, is that property law has separated the idea of place. So you have property law, which is like you have a right to do this, whatever you want to do on it, and then you mitigate against it. Place is the responsibility and the rights together on a land that you have to be living on that. You have to do the commoning. It can't be just a thinking process. You have to see, that these trees are too low, so I need to cut. And then that becomes a right, a custom. So that it has to come from the movements, the things that we do on the land. And that is an ecological perspective. And I think we need an ecological perspective, both in our sense of our identity and learning about stewardship and governance. And that's about bringing rights and responsibilities to a place, and this is a place, and it's remembering that and coming to that knowledge again.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any more questions? I think we'd like to take another one at least, yeah? Sorry, I've got 3. I'll take you first.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment about, to answer this question as well, a little bit about the Charter of the Commons, and that I think we've been thinking about it with Newcastle debates, that to make it local, that it has, the Charter of the Commons, to be meaningful, needs to be based on a place, and that people need to come together, and what we've been debating is, where is that meaningful? I mean, probably if we live in a town, it's meaningful in Frome, it's meaningful there for people to come together. In London, is it meaningful in our neighbourhoods that we might identify with in Clapham, for example? Is it meaningful across the city? But the Charter of the Forest, and it's completely legitimate to look at it at a national level as well, because it was, but it also was very much about people coming together about a place. So I think it needs. I think now we need to ground up politics and to make a charter from a place.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Yes. Would you like to go next?
Yeah. Just to share with you 4 words that came out of the court papers presented by Tom Pickering, director of INEOS for the UK. Because these words draw together a lot of what's been discussed today. He said that a conventional well site, without the fracking chemicals, and the roads that we use to transport these items to the sites and from the sites, and these are words in the court papers, ecotoxic, damaging to all living things. Carcinogenic, these are words in the court, in a statement of truth to the High Court. Carcinogenic, and I think most of us know what that means because of cigarette packets and so on. But here's 2 words I didn't know. Mutagenic, permanent damage to my DNA and your DNA.
Wow.
My DNA doesn't particularly matter to me now because of my age, but it does
Certainly does to the youth.
to my granddaughter who was born last Monday. And finally, teratogenic, damaging to fetuses of animals and humans.
Wow.
They use that to try and scare a judge to say, that's why we must have a law against trespass, because these bad people will invade the site and those chemicals might get released into the environment. But the fact is, that stuff is transported on our highways.
Yes.
And I can prove it, there is no regulation by the Environment Agency of a lorry once it is on the highway. They only regulate when it's on the site itself.
And where is that stuff going? Anyway, they're pumping it into the ground.
Yeah, there's going to be thousands
Okay.
of gallons.
I just
Thank you for that.
And it's thanks to Joe that I've got those papers.
Yeah.
It's because of Joe having the courage to stand up and do all that, that stuff will be in the public domain very shortly.
Brilliant. Sorry, yes, there's a lady over there. The lady over there had a question.
Well, it's a comment and it's just following on from that. So I do many things, but I hold the wallet for frack-free knots. I have the money pot here this evening, and I ask you to empty your purses on the way out.
Brilliant.
And everything I get today will be given to Joe and his campaign. It's very easy to say, go online and do it, but many people may not know that website, may not know how to do it. But if you've got money in your pocket today, you can always get some more from a cash machine if you need to go to the club later. But whatever you've got in here, and I will transfer it to Joe's campaign.
Right, thank you very much. I'd like to sort of just round up the day with a few words, because I think if Phil Jones would like to just close with a final statement.
Thank you. Phil Jones, I've been with the Edwin Stowe fracking group for a year and a bit. I'm hijacking we had another speaker, but I'm just going to hijack 2 minutes of his space. I find it quite interesting what you brought out, because I've picked up some similar information in actual fact. If you take a close look at the wells that were developed closer to habitation, you'll find all kinds of horror stories. For a very long time, fracking, which we have to remember actually started in the 1940s, believe it or not. The principle of fracturing anyway. Started all that time ago, but when they started working in some of the outlying areas, it's particularly true in America, and it's also true in Australia, where you can travel for 1,000 miles and never see anything or anybody. And I picked up some of the information that our friend mentioned there, because it said in the US, Chesapeake Energy Corporation, who were taken to the courts when a well malfunctioned, spewing thousands of gallons of fracking waste into the land, and it contaminated, and it continued to contaminate until they were able to reverse the pumps. Now, you would have thought that anybody invented a pump would put a simple handle on it, wouldn't you? Turn it the other way. But it couldn't be reversed for a couple of days. And in other cases, fracking wells release compounds into the air such as benzene, ethylbenzene, toluene and hexane. And some of you getting on for my age, where your science probably is quite a few years ago, need some rust banging off there. But just to remind you, benzene is a known carcinogen, and some of these gases are known to cause birth defects. So it is a serious, serious issue. But it's amazing how these things creep up on you. We're at the beginning of this cycle. Many have preceded us in this. I've got a few more facts which I think we're adequately covered, which I'm not going to mention here. But there are examples of serious impact that fracking has caused. And in the US now, there's a ban on fracking in certain states. The New York State Department of Health first put a moratorium on fracking in 2014. This later went on to become a ban when it said, quote, there is a significant public health risk. I mean, you can't misunderstand those few words, can you really? If we turn to the UK, because Pauline's heard me mention this and Deb's has many times, we all have our views. We live in a free democratic society, and it's entirely good that we do, and we can exercise those views. But quite often I come from a background where scientific fact actually speaks volumes. Somebody can challenge your view, they can't challenge the facts, certainly not if they're true. But if we turn to the UK, 20 leading medical experts, including the former government Deputy Chief Medical Officer and the former chair of the Royal College of GPs, stated, and he did this in the British Medical Journal, that the arguments against fracking on public health grounds are overwhelming. Again, a simple statement, how could you get that wrong? I've not touched on global warming, and I know it has been mentioned in the margins this afternoon, but only this week you will have seen, I'm sure, national and international news breaking to say that global warming and contamination of our atmosphere has reached record proportions. I'm concerned, I'm one of the oldest members in this room, and I'm probably not going to pick up the tab for this if it all goes wrong. But I can tell you, as the Vice Chair of Governors at a local school here, primary school here, I am reminded every day of the value of protecting this planet for our young kids. And I'm just going to leave you with a few facts, because I've got my views, I'm not going to express them. I'm just going to give you some facts. In June 2016, Germany passed a law banning fracking, allowing only, quote, research for non-commercial reasons. Well, that'll drive the old guys out. The Netherlands placed a strong moratorium on fracking exploration in 2013, and they want to see more detailed proof that it's being safe. That's a sensible place to go, isn't it? In Poland and Romania, there have been heavy protests from people, to the point that Chevron, who you may know is a huge company, has now given up on its fracking activities there. And indeed, Chevron has cancelled all its pursuing shale anywhere in Europe. In May 2012, the state of Vermont in the US became the first state to, quote, outlaw, unquote, hydraulic fracturing. New York banned the practice in December 2014, and other states are quickly following. In Canada, 4 of the 10 provinces, nearly 50%, have banned fracking, and the remainder are considering their position. In Australia, where they've been fracking for many years, public concern and protest is beginning to deliver results. In New South Wales, which is a huge part of the populated Australia, the government banned BTX chemicals as additives as of 2016. Most companies know that if you can't pump these chemicals down, you probably can't deliver the goods. Victoria has permanently banned hydraulic fracturing and all forms of unconventional gas extraction. So where am I going with all this? I have spent a long time researching, developing high technology in my life. And I have no compunctions about stealing other people's good ideas. If you do the research, it'll tell you this just doesn't work. So we need to be looking at that evidence closely and coming up against it. Now, if I was to say one thing to leave you with today, it is to go out there and talk to somebody else. Bring them on side. People power is very powerful, and I commend it to you.